What's up, everybody? This is Darren and Dylan at GitLab, and we were just chatting, and we thought, you know what, maybe the greater world could benefit from some of this. And we were talking about remote work and the life of a digital nomad. I don't even know how many time zones apart we are right now. We're a couple of oceans away. I mean, we're pretty far apart. I think we're close to like being exactly halfway around the globe from each other, which is pretty fantastic. But when Dylan first joined GitLab, he did so because he wanted to travel a lot, and he lived the nomad life. And I think a lot of people that are considering applying at GitLab or any other all remote or remote first company, that definitely ticks the box for some people. So I wanted to invite Dylan on to talk about that experience. So Dylan, introduce yourself and tell us a bit of background of why you joined GitLab.
Yeah, hi, I'm an engineer at GitLab. I joined GitLab in February last year, so I've been at the company over a year and a half now. And in the past, I'd worked at several jobs as a software engineer where I was working in an office with other people, and I actually really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed collaboration, and I really enjoyed pair programming and working very intensely collaboratively with other people. At the previous company I was working at, because of the nature of us wanting to do pair programming all the time on a schedule, we had a very disciplined working hours, and it had its advantages, and I enjoyed the intense collaboration I got from it. But after a while, I came to the realization that I wanted to spend more time traveling. Are we still, you seem to have frozen there. We still here recording?
You've got me, yeah.
I am seeing this cutting out.
It's cutting out. It's all good here.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so the previous job, I felt like I wanted more opportunities to travel, and I did. You have the way we worked, the value I offered for the company, and the work I could do was only when I was in the office. And I only had 4 weeks of leave per year that I could use to travel around. And when I started reading a little bit about GitLab, I was a GitLab user beforehand, and starting to read about the remote culture and all of this, I got really excited about the idea of working this way. I previously had considered, oh, if I go and find a job in Europe somewhere and I move over there, I'll get the opportunity to travel to parts of the world that I'd never seen before, but you know, on weekends or whatever. And then, yeah, when I thought more about it, I thought, well, I don't know where I want to live in Europe. I don't really know enough about that. I want to have complete flexibility, and the more I read about GitLab, the more that opportunity just became like a reality. It seemed like a crazy dream. So after I joined, I specifically was talking to the recruiters during my interview process saying, look, I live in Sydney now, but I'm gonna join, and I'm doing this because I plan to, a month or so after I get the job, I will move out and start traveling around indefinitely, probably for at least a year. And I did that. I joined and was working from Sydney. Everybody in my team was in Europe, so I had very little overlap and with my coworkers, and that was a little bit tricky for a tough onboarding. But nowadays at GitLab, we have lots of people across many different time zones, so it's not as hard as it used to be. But then when I started traveling to Europe, I actually became much closer to my coworkers, having much more overlap with them. And it didn't really matter that I was working and traveling from a different city every few weeks. I just, you know, everybody in the team just kind of adjusts to when you're available, you know, you can chat synchronously. When you're not working at the same time, you chat asynchronously. And that's totally fine. I mean, we're ideally optimizing for everybody communicating asynchronously anyway. So whatever time zone I worked in didn't matter too much. I traveled around mostly Europe for like about 8 months, and then around North America for a few months before coming back to Australia and moving back home now. And that's kind of the high level of what I did. It worked really well. Actually, while I was traveling, I joined as a software engineer, and then got promoted to be a software engineering manager while I was away, and built a team of about 5 people reporting to me from all over the world. Ironically, I was living in Europe, and I had people reporting to me who were back in Australia and New Zealand. So very little working overlap with them at the time. And yeah, we never really, I mean, there are challenges with time zones and finding times to have meetings and things like that, but our team was perfectly capable of functioning despite the fact that a lot of us didn't really have working day overlaps at all.
Incredible. I do want to dig into a little bit of the logistics around being a full-time digital nomad, but I want to dive in a little bit on your focus on async and working asynchronously. Completely asynchronously is a unique facet of GitLab where we don't mandate that any people or teams have any working overlap whatsoever. And we lean on GitLab issues and merge requests and the discussion threads within those to keep everybody on the same page no matter where they're at. But it does take some intentionality. I'm curious, would things have been as smooth for you or as enjoyable for you, and do you think you could have been promoted and managed a team if you were doing all of that traveling and working in an environment that was not so amenable to async?
Yeah, definitely that deliberate intent at GitLab, and so well demonstrated by leadership at GitLab, and encouraged to communicate asynchronously, using tools that are deliberately designed for asynchronous communication made this easier. Like when I considered my options, like I had the possibility of potentially working with an Australian company and saying to that Australian company, I want to join your company, I want to work remotely, and that that could have been a possibility. But if I joined a team that was all based in Sydney and then traveled to Europe where I had no working day overlap with them, I expect that the empathy levels between my coworkers and me would break down probably naturally over time, because you have a bunch of people in an office that are going out to have lunch together each day and talking about how work's going, and I'm not there. So I had seen that before, working in teams where some people were remote and some people were not. It naturally leads to kind of a difference. There's those people that aren't here, and then there's us in the office. And so having the ability to build influence, get promoted, things like that, working remotely, I don't believe that kind of thing is generally easy at a company that's not intentional about making remote workers feel the same as every other employee. And in practice, that's a very difficult thing to accomplish unless you say, well, everybody's remote and we're and we have no offices, so we have no advantaged employees. The asynchronous communication and making what I learned from working in Sydney and feeling a little bit disadvantaged at the time joining GitLab, because we had most people, GitLab still has this challenge today. It's not perfect, but we try to do company-wide meetings every day, and those company-wide meetings happen at a time that kind of spans the time zone range from West Coast US to sort of Central Europe, and that time zone span doesn't include Sydney, and what it'll be in here back at home would be 2 a.m. those company-wide meetings. And they, as a consequence, you can be a little bit left out in Australia, and it's getting a lot better with the more employees we have. But as a manager, one of my intentions was, okay, if the reality is time zones are an impediment to some people being as connected to other people in the company like as others, then I think what we want to do to make it best for everybody is to make everybody equally disadvantaged by time zones. And so what was an intentional, deliberate decision in our team wasn't to have the standard, okay, we're going to have a team meeting at this time, and okay, that team meeting's optional. So some people in a, less, in a time zone more isolated from the rest of the team, they might not be able to attend that weekly team meeting, which is what things were a bit like when I joined. To, okay, we're going to have rolling team meetings. They're all optional. They're all at times that are eventually going to be inconvenient for some people, regardless of what time zone you're in. And we're going to lean on asynchronous communication and try to dial back our efforts to use synchronous communication. And GitLab, we were able to do that quite well because it was already aligned with what the company was hoping to accomplish in general by encouraging asynchronous communication. We're already set up to do all of that stuff really well. But yeah, it requires intentionality, and the company, as the company grows and we span more and more time zones, we've been getting better and better at this. We're only recently introduced the CEO doing an AMA that covers Australian time zones, and the VP of engineering similarly doing his weekly office hours in a time that accommodates Australia and actually APAC in general. So we're improving over this on this area over time. We had, when I joined, it was just so far and away outweighing APAC was all the employees in Europe and America. So it just made sense for things that things naturally became optimized for those time zones.
Yeah, and I'll say what I've noticed is that as GitLab has scaled and more people have joined the company across a greater variety of time zones, it actually gets easier to work this way. So a lot of people have said to me, hey, as GitLab scales, as it gets bigger, doesn't the time zone issue become more pronounced? And it's actually the opposite. Because when you have more people that can support smaller teams or sort of carry the message over the time zones, it actually becomes easier. And I think new startups that are starting their company remote first or all remote, if they do happen to hire all of their initial team roughly in the same place or in the same time zone, one thing to be really careful about is to not default to meetings or default to being there in person, because it's actually more painful as you grow, and you'll start to become biased towards hiring within your time zone, even if it's not the best talent or the best opportunity for the business. So that's one of those odd things that you think would become more difficult over time, but it's actually the most difficult at inception. And there's a few things like that, but I would say that's definitely one of them. So I want to talk a little bit about how you made the digital nomad life happen. A lot of people that want to live this life, they don't have a lot of options, because to your point, you could work for a company that is remote tolerant, but you know that you may be treated as a second-class citizen. And you specifically mentioned that even during your nomad run, you were able to get promoted and build up a team. That's almost unheard of. And a lot of people that I've spoken with say, look, I love everything about remote, but I'm a career-minded person. And I just feel like if I do the remote thing and I'm not in person in the office, I'm going to be passed over for praise and promotion. And whether that's founded in reality or not, it's something that people are worried about. And to your point, if you just say everyone's remote, even the executive team, you level that playing field. So anyway, if you want to talk a little bit about that, by all means, but I'm interested in the equipment that you took along. Did it change over the course of time? Did you stay with friends? Did you stay at hotels? Any other tips that you would give people that are looking to do this?
Yeah, there's one of the things I try to explain to most people about working remotely, like there are technical challenges, like how do I get internet? How do I find a comfortable space to work? I don't know if that's a technical challenge, but like logistical things like that, right? That what I found almost was certainly the case for me, and a lot from what I read about other people talking about becoming a digital nomad, a lot of the biggest challenges are really personal ones that you actually have to figure out yourself. And for me, it was, I couldn't be comfortable going and living long term in a new place if I didn't have access to somewhere I could exercise regularly. And like, this is a daily routine that it either makes me enjoy my my day or my week or not. And what that meant for me was finding accommodation where we had access to a gym or somewhere that it's comfortable to go running, because for whatever reason, you might go to a city where it's way too hot to go running or way too polluted to go running, or doesn't accommodate pedestrians at all. And so finding access to those things was key to me enjoying the overall trip, and also finding accommodation for longer periods of time, because hopping between places every few days or every week was just a stressful activity. So the periods of time while we were traveling, and where I did that, it just didn't work out so well, and I didn't feel as productive at work, and I just didn't feel like I was enjoying myself. It was less fun. So what ended up practically being the best option at all times was find an Airbnb for a period of 4 to 6 weeks. Those were kind of the timelines that I aimed for each time. Find a city where the Airbnb is either an apartment that has a gym or has a gym nearby where I can sign up for a short-term membership. And they're tricky things to figure out ahead of time, especially if you're going to a city where you don't speak the local language, to try to figure out, does this city have a gym I can sign up for a short-term membership? And you go to their website and it's in a different language, or their website's just not very good. And it's like, could I call them up and ask this gym if I can join? Are they going to be able to speak English? And I'm sure not going to be able to speak their language. So those are like particular logistic things. They're staying in an Airbnb for over 4 weeks as well meant you get this monthly discount on Airbnb. And if you are paying close attention to the prices, there were times where we got a 60% monthly discount. Like it's up to the person who puts it on Airbnb how much the monthly discount is. And yeah, sometimes we got a 30% monthly discount, but sometimes it was really, really great. And if you're getting a 60% monthly discount, even if you didn't want to stay there for the 6 weeks that you booked for, you can still take a weekend trip somewhere else and you're still effectively saving money. Like, for example, where'd we go? I spent a long time in Vienna and had a comfortable Airbnb there. We had a gym in the building, but during that time, I took a weekend trip to Sweden because we wanted to go visit the ice hotel in Sweden, and actually ended up being like a 4 or 5 day weekend. That was a little bit of a holiday for me, but I could have booked accommodation before that, and then the ice hotel, and then the accommodation after that, and it would have probably worked out more expensive than the staying in Vienna the whole time option. Plus, having an apartment there was immensely comforting when I wanted to go to the ice hotel and not bring all of my suitcase with all of this extra stuff that was not appropriate for that particular trip, that short trip. So having an apartment, now apartments stocked up with food for cooking at home. So every time you travel around, you need to buy a bunch of essentials again, like salt and pepper and oil, and sometimes utensils that you're used to cooking with, because you get to an Airbnb that doesn't have the particular equipment that you need to cook with. So all of these things, the longer you stay in one place, the more comfortable you can be.
Yeah, all incredibly great tips. It's very sage wisdom. I actually know a nomad who tried to do it more rapidly, kind of move from place to place on like a 3 to 4 day clip. And what you'll end up finding is that a lot of people that try that burn out really quickly, and they kind of get jaded with it. And so I think each person is a little different, but the time spans that you need to spend in one place so that it's enjoyable versus just a chore. And as soon as you check in, you're already thinking about the logistics of how you're going to get to the next place. That's not really what it's about. It's, at least for me, it's staying in a place long enough to enjoy it, but then moving on to a new place before it basically becomes home. So that balance, you kind of got to feel it out and find out what that is for you.
And I made mistakes with that as well. Like I did a bunch of short trips in a row around Christmas, New Year's time. And then there was like, so I was traveling with my wife the whole time. And then there was a period of time when my wife had the opportunity to go meet her dad in a Caribbean island that I would have really loved to visit. But after this point, I knew that I was just exhausted with traveling, and I wasn't excited by the idea of holidaying at this point, because I'd just been to Switzerland and Germany and Mexico, and I was just like, I'm not looking forward to a holiday. I just want to find a desk where I can comfortably work right now. And going to a tropical island just like didn't appeal to me, even though this would have been one of the most exciting, enjoyable things I would have done on the trip. I decided to not go, and she went on her own, and I went to Chicago because I was like, I know I can get a comfortable apartment and just work from Chicago, and I'm not looking for a holiday at this moment. And yeah, that was kind of like where it became apparent to me that that was just, there is a clear limit. And if I do 5 different countries, each with a few days at a time in a row, I'm just not going to be finding that fun anymore. I'm going to be sitting in the hotel going, I'd rather be in a comfortable apartment now than and not going outside, cooking my own food and things like that.
There's something to be said about that. The Instagram versus reality, where it's okay to be on a nomadic excursion and then just press pause, and you just need to be in one place for a minute. It's sort of the nomadic equivalent of rest and sleeping. It's like sometimes you just need to stop and recharge, such that the future journeys beyond that point are actually enjoyable, and that you actually have the mental energy to soak in what you're about to experience. Another issue is just overload. If you just go to so many beautiful places in a row, it's hard to even document it. You can't even stop to process the photos that you're taking, even though you know they're spectacular and they're beautiful. It's like, I'm on to the next place. I can't even soak it in. So what equipment did you take for those side journeys? Was it essential for you to have access to a washer and drying facilities, or did you just sort of find a local laundromat? I know clothing is a big thing for people, and weight is a big thing for people. So a lot of nomads will aim for the absolute lightest laptop they can find, the smallest power converter they can find, things like that. Any tips for do's and don'ts?
I don't know, I probably wasn't particularly well optimized for equipment. My wife and I both had a 23 kilogram, or what is like 50-pound suitcase each. So neither of us were particularly good at that. I actually took my snowboarding boots with me on the whole trip and my helmet, because I knew that I wanted to go snowboarding, and I bought those boots to use. So I was like, well, I'm going to take them traveling. So I wasn't particularly optimized for that, but I did get a decent backpack that I could fit my laptop in. I ended up somewhat accidentally having two laptops just because I had a personal one before I got the work one. My work laptop is 15-inch MacBook Pro, and my personal laptop's a 12-inch MacBook, which is really thin and light. So actually, when I did short trips, it was convenient for me to have a second small laptop that I could take with me on a weekend trip. And it actually kind of helped me with the whole, okay, my weekends I'm getting away from work anyway. So if I just take my personal laptop, it makes it harder for me to get work done on my personal laptop anyway. And it's lighter and it has a longer battery. I actually, related to battery, I have this massive power pack that had 20,000 milliamp hours, and since it was USB-C, it could charge my laptops as well as my phones and things like that. That was very valuable, and even in ways that I didn't think would be ahead of time, because one of the funny things I found is, like, regularly I'd go to an apartment or an Airbnb or a hotel where there's no power point next to the bed. And actually, since I had a 20,000 milliamp hour battery, I was just plugging my phone into the charger on the battery next to the bed. Overnight, selected my phone there, and then charge the battery during the day. And that was a trick that allowed me to charge my laptop, charge my phone wherever I was, whether there was an easy accessible power point or not. Other equipment, I have a laptop stand that folds up. It's the roost stand that folds up into a really small space, and you can set your laptop up on stand. And then if you have your laptop on a stand, you obviously need a mouse and keyboard, because otherwise you're typing up there, which is really not ergonomic at all. So had a mouse and a keyboard. Neither of those were particularly lightweight. I don't like using the Apple keyboards, but if people do like using those ones, probably they're some of the best lightweight keyboards and mouse that you can get, because they're really small. Whereas I have a big mechanical keyboard, and that just took up a bit of space, but it wasn't too heavy. Clothes, I tried to be somewhat minimalist about clothes, and mostly just buying like a few of the same t-shirts and things like that I was wearing while traveling, and not worrying too much about having a variety of outfits while traveling around. It's a tricky thing for me. I like having lots of different clothes, but yeah, I had to be a bit more ruthless when you have to fit all that stuff into a suitcase. Yeah, having a good backpack, I think, is key. Although one of the things I did learn is, depending on what you're doing, if you're flying a lot, you might prefer to have a carry-on suitcase that rolls rather than having a big heavy backpack, because when you're waiting around an airport a lot, having it on the ground, it's much less strain on you. And particularly my wife found that, like, we both thought it was a good idea to get big backpacks ahead of time, because a big backpack, that's much more efficient when you're walking around the city with your stuff, and you've already got another big rolling suitcase that you're using for checked luggage. But she got really sick of that, and so did I, to some extent, having a heavy backpack with a lot of things in it, and would have preferred a rolling suitcase.
Any favorite locations along the way, and any sort of disasters that you learned from?
We never had any particular disasters. One of the things that was a bit of a funny experience was, like, I was excited to going somewhere in Eastern Europe, because from what I could tell, a lot of these cities and countries have incredibly good internet connections. And I was really sick of having not ideal internet connections in places I was going to. They're all always okay, but sometimes cutting out, which is a little bit embarrassing during video calls when it happens to you very frequently. So we booked a trip to Bucharest, Romania, which has, like, a reputation for having a very good internet connections. It's one of the best internet speeds on average in the world. And the apartment I booked seemed nice, it was new and everything like that. And when we got there, the internet connection speed was really slow, and it was much worse than anywhere else I'd been. And I was like, I can't actually practically work on this internet connection the whole time I'm here. So I found a local co-working space nearby and ended up having to book a desk there, which fortunately GitLab will reimburse the cost of co-working offices. So I booked a month at that co-working space and went there every day, which actually turned out to be good, because I met some locals and was working in an office with other people and having lunch with them, which was kind of nice. favorite locations. There's probably, this is kind of my funny experience with traveling, is all my favorite locations were about me feeling like I was at home. So like the things I would get most excited about were like, okay, I'm in an apartment and I know where to go and buy nice bread and avocados nearby. And I can go and do that every few days, and I have my avocado and toast for breakfast. And so when we were in Valencia in Spain, I had that all figured out. There was a great bakery nearby the apartment. I could get coffees from there in the morning, and there was a great market where I could go and buy avocados. And if I had those two needs sorted out every day, then that made me feel really comfortable and enjoy living there, and also having access to a gym. So there's many cities in the world, and they're all interesting and beautiful in different ways, but those were the things that I enjoyed most. And for that, Spain, Valencia, Spain, and Vienna in Austria were some of the best.
That's awesome. One thing I picked up on there that I would agree with, there's a difference between a digital nomad who is primarily working, but secondarily getting to visit new places that they ordinarily would not, and taking a year-long sabbatical and just traveling, like, and never checking your email. So in situations where you need to actually function and work day to day, you become hyper focused on maximizing your time such that you can enjoy the new place that you're at. And things like scrambling to find groceries or find a laundromat, they eat into the time that you would otherwise be enjoying a new place. So they really, really bother you. If you're on vacation, you're like, well, what else am I doing this week? It's not really going to bother me. So that's important for nomads to consider, looking at mapping things out as best you can ahead of time, getting tips from locals if you can, read up on forums and resources, things like that, to kind of get as much foresight as you can to make your trip as efficient as possible. Speaking of resources, are there any websites or go-to forums that you would recommend people looking into?
I definitely used Nomad List a lot. That website was useful, and checking, like, there's many different pages to that tips. I never actually joined to become a member because, well, I did see there was some value in some of the membership features of Nomad List. I probably wasn't using it enough, and I was probably finding information in different ways. I think majority of what planning looked like was like, okay, start with a city in mind. Then we go to Airbnb, figure out what the costs look like. Is it actually reasonable to book an Airbnb at this place for a month? Start with an Airbnb filter that has like everything you'd really want in it. And then you can filter by whether or not they've got a gym on Airbnb. Start filtering that down, you get a sense of, okay, is it practical to stay in a place with a gym? If it isn't, which is a lot of cities just don't have apartments with gyms, it's pretty uncommon in some cities, then find a nearby gym. So now I'm on Google Maps looking up gyms in the area, and my wife's looking yoga studios in the area where she can join for a short-term period, and trying to connect all those things. Is this place near grocery stores? Is it near public transport where you can conveniently get around? And trying to map out the whole area on Google Maps, and trying to figure out ahead of time, it's like, what's my daily routine going to look like? Am I going to be happy here? And yeah, being aware of the fact that you know, it's not a holiday, and it's like, okay, you can say I'm booking an apartment in this location, and it's going to give me access to visit all of these sites. So, you know, like I could go see this 1,000-year-old church and all of these different things, and that might be interesting. But considering that that's sort of just a weekend activity when you're working while traveling, you want to be optimizing for all the other things. Like, you're going to be getting groceries every few days. Sometimes you're going to want to be able to just get an easy takeout dinner because you can't bother cooking that night. And some cities, that's really difficult. Like, just like, I don't want to cook tonight. What are my options for eating? And you find that, yeah, like you can, they're all particularly exotic cuisines that you don't necessarily want that night. You just want something simple. So like, is takeaway even an option, or do I have to go and dine in at a restaurant? And I don't necessarily want that. Yeah, like I have particular, like being from Australia, I just have a particular way I'm used to living. And it's like, I would get these groceries, and if I didn't feel like cooking, I'd get takeout. Sometimes I would want to go out to a restaurant, but that's not the majority of the time. Yeah.
Incredible. These tips are amazing. We actually have an all remote section dedicated to people, and nomads is a section within that. But this makes me realize we have so much more to build to do this. Thank you so much for joining me. Do you have any other last thoughts that you want to offer up?
Yeah, last thoughts would be anybody that wants to do this should not feel pressured to live some lifestyle that people expect of you when you're doing this. And it took me a while to get used to just telling people, like, they're like, oh, you're constantly holidaying. And then sometimes people will be like, oh, that's a shame that you had to work while doing this and whatever else. And like, it was like, actually, I just kind of get satisfaction from living my normal life. But it turned out for me, I got more excited about finding a new home each time I was going to move somewhere and settling in and feeling comfortable in that place. And then, yeah, we had some weekend activities, we saw sites. But if I felt stressed or pressured to be living, I spent 7 months in Europe, and there's plenty of places I didn't go, and there's plenty of sites I didn't go see, and I might have gone to a city and I might have missed some landmark that I should have visited in that city. But if I felt pressured to do all those things, I know I wouldn't have enjoyed it in the same way. So figuring out what is comfortable and enjoyable for you is pretty key to making it work.
Amazing. Yeah, agreed. That's great advice. So if you're a digital nomad and you're looking for your next career adventure, check out the GitLab's job page. We obviously have a culture that embraces that. We have a travel Slack channel and a remote Slack channel where we keep up with all of this. And I'll ask you one last thing. Did you take advantage of the visiting grant while you were traveling around?
Yeah, a few times. Spain, Austria, Chicago, Mexico City. We actually had like most of my team all met up in Mexico City just to work. We booked a co-working office for a couple of days there because a few of us were in Mexico City already, and then some others were just like very close by, short flights. So visiting grant, I took advantage of maybe like 5 times all up on throughout the trip. Certainly, I certainly didn't optimize for it, but it was very nice to get $150 reimbursed per person that I meet for my flights or train trip to the particular city I was visiting. So yes, it was awesome, and I really appreciate that GitLab has that, and I'm really surprised that GitLab's still so generously offering that now that we have 1,000 employees. I was sure after I started this visiting grant wouldn't last much longer. The company's growing so fast, and it's still there. So if people haven't taken advantage of it yet, I recommend people should at least try to use it. It's a very, very awesome opportunity.
For sure. And I'll say, I think part of the reason why it stays is leadership realizes that when you don't have a natural way for people to interact in person day to day, or even on a semi-regular basis, encouraging people to get out there and meet other people and immerse themselves in new cultures, it makes you a more empathetic person, a more compassionate person. It makes you realize that the world is really big and we serve a really broad customer base. So it's one of those things that it's an expense, but it's a worthwhile expense. And to your point, it's just cool that it's around. Even if you go a year without using it, knowing that other people are able to use it, and if you wanted to on a whim go visit someone and get it partially reimbursed, it's pretty incredible. It's not found everywhere, but it also says a lot of just about the culture in general, that we want people out there exploring. We want people to get out of their comfort zone if they so choose. And that's big. And we definitely hope more companies embrace that. So on that note, for viewers, I'm going to put all of the links that we talked about on this call down in the YouTube description. Feel free to dig in and make an MR if you have something to add. Dylan, thanks so much for joining me. We'll have to do this again soon.
Thanks. Have a good afternoon.